From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Thanks for tuning in. K-State's Dan O'Brien is standing by to remark on how much bullishness may be left in this soybean market, and he'll offer his latest price probability projections for corn and soybeans during Dan's weekly segment on the grain market trends. Also today, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti on estimating grain sorghum yields ahead of harvest using information that he recently posted in the K-State Agronomuy E-Update Newsletter. And he'll tell of a new app soon to come out from K-State, which can simplify this process even further. And later, K-State's Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather. All that and much more straight ahead on this Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. The grain markets are our first interest today, as usual on a Friday, and joining us once more is grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien. Dan along from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas, of course. Well, Dan, let's begin with the real showstopper in the trades this week, and that is the soybean market. New crop beans eclipsed that $10 mark, and if for nothing else, for psychological reasons, that's a big development.
Eclipsed it, and it's kept going. Yesterday, the November contract, the harvest contract, closed 10.28.5, up another 17.5 cents. January 10.31, and once we get from November to January with a little bit of a price rise, then we've got a declining market. So we have an inverted market indicating that, quote, we want it now. If you got it, let's have it. And you do see a pretty sharp movement on the export side. The USDA came out yesterday with their weekly report, basically export numbers through September the 10th, and had actual shipments of about 63, 64 million bushels in this new marketing year. The pace needed to meet the USDA's projection, 2.125 billion bushels, which is up from 1.7 last year, is about 41 million bushels a week. And so, gosh, we're at 60 some. And of course, you're always having to balance that with the idea that we have the market, we have the window for this 6 months until the Brazilian crops start to come into play, and then they start to compete pretty readily with this. So there's certainly a strong market. And when you look at the total amount of export sales and see which countries are buying, of the total accumulated exports so far that have happened in this marketing year, we're just starting this current marketing year, you're looking at 1.5 million metric tons to China of a total of 2.25 to everybody. So that's 60-some%. And that compares last year to 410 million. Of course, we were dealing with trade issues and who knows what. There are some other players. So China sits at about 1.5 million metric tons. The next biggest buyer, you got Mexico at 115,000 metric tons of accumulated exports so far. Egypt coming in 113. You see Japan at 89, Netherlands 115. So if we need verification and proof that the moves by China are dominating that market, gosh, we sure have it. And when you look at the amount that's bought ahead in the soybean market, you're looking at about, of that 2.125 billion bushels projected for this marketing year, about 1.1 or 1.2 billion of it are already bought ahead. So we're about 3.84% of the way into this marketing year, i.e. 2 weeks in, and we have about 55 to 56% of projected sales already bought.
That's remarkable, really.
It is indicative of a worried, panicky buying situation by China. and I mean this sincerely, the unfortunate floods and all the damage and all the problems that are happening over there with first the Yangtze River and Three Gorges Dam concerns, and then the hurricane that came through and that went up more so into the wheat, soybean areas, corn areas of the country, that North China Plain, are causing them day by day to come in and be buying stuff. So, you have that situation. So we look now at soybeans over $10, looking at the lack of carry in soybean futures and putting a basis number on it, which we do back behind the scenes to try to understand what the market's saying. Right now it's a flat market, which means everything's driven by the upfront contract. Because they're buying now. They want it up front. There's no signal for carry, really, at all in that market. So here we're sitting not that far from soybean harvest, and it looks like, unless something changes, that there'll be strong incentives to sell pretty quickly and not store. I mean, you could hold and see what happens, but the market right now is saying we want it. So it at least behooves some movement to generate cash flow and just a recognition that, we may have a reward later on, but if you hold very much longer, you'll see happen what we've already heard in the ag press right now in the last several days, that, man, Brazil is going to plant a lot of soybean acres next year. And, oh, yes, by the way, so is the United States. So we have a situation that we didn't anticipate in the doldrums of this last summer at all, other than seeing, gosh, it's pretty wet over there, and they seem to have a lot of problems in China. So here we are.
Again, though, as you say, Dan, with the combines soon to roll and the soybean harvest to commence, it's on the mind of every producer how much more upside is there to this market, because nobody wants to miss out on a better pricing opportunity if we're to see that beyond what the market's offering today.
Well, we've taken the USDA supply-demand balance sheet that came out of the September 11th supply-demand estimates in the WASDE report, and basically figured that what the USDA projected for the rest of this marketing year for beans, which is a $9.25 farm average price, has probably about, by my own estimate, in making a judgment on the market, about 40% chance of being right. And that most other scenarios having to do with, say, 100 million bushels more of exports or 200 million bushels more of exports, or a harvest situation in some pretty dry spots in Iowa and Eastern Corn Belt of, say, 250 million bushels less of harvest. Either way, in all those other scenarios, you start at about $9.75 for a season average price and end up at 12 something. So maybe the issue is we're sitting at about a projection about 10.4% stocks to use, and more exports, lower crop. Every one of those scenarios takes you below 10% stocks to use. It's just a matter of how far. And you're starting to move out of the historic path where we've had enough stocks to use that we've been kind of in this elastic flat part of that supply-demand relationship. If we get below 10%, we start to tighten things up, and the price starts to respond more and more. Mm-hmm. But as we said, Eric, you and I have talked about this again, and this also in the past, when we see profitability in an enterprise or anticipated profitability, what do we tend to do? Well, we put resources towards it, plant a lot of acres on it, towards it, and tend to oversupply the situation. So it behooves us to think about how to manage this deal this time around. In the short run here, China got caught short. Our crop's so-so. It's not as good as it could be on the soybean side. If we do see some pricing opportunities, given how the cash market's going to respond, and if they possibly can and produce a whole bunch of soybeans, it'll be the time to have a good, sound pre-harvest marketing strategy going into 2021, because it looks like that the profitability literally that we're seeing now in soybean market will be responded to, and we'll be at risk to having this type of profitability stick around to fall 2021. Here we haven't even got fully into fall 2020, and we're trying to anticipate what's going to happen in fall 2021.
Right. And in our remaining time, remarks on the corn market. Open weather these past several days have surely allowed the harvest to advance here in Kansas. You have also put together your price scenarios for the feed grains. And what does that analysis say?
Well, start with the idea that the USDA yield of 178.5 could very well be moving lower. It's just a matter of how much. Some well-known people that from Kansas, good independent analysts, have come out and said, gosh, their numbers say about 175 bushel an acre. And the USDA's figure is 178.5, and that's down from 181 something not too long ago. Of course, you're dealing with national issues, what's happening through dry conditions and windstorms in the central Corn Belt, some drier conditions elsewhere, spottiness in parts of western Kansas. So if you start plugging in 176 bushels an acre, 174 bushels an acre, you get down to 14.7, 14.5 billion bushel crops, and you end up and take ending stocks to use down closer to 2.1, 2.2 billion bushels, and tighten things up a little bit. So again, you're still in that part of the supply-demand relationship where, yeah, we can tighten up some, but it doesn't have a lot of impact on price. But once you start having a short crop and start seeing some stronger usage with it, then you start getting down to, again, 2 billion bushels, or in most extreme case, 1.8, 1.7. At that point, you start approaching $3.94. So right now, we're really concerned about soybeans, not watching a lot on the corn market. So I guess the October report, the November report will either confirm or not the kind of pessimism about whether we have all that much corn as the USDA has projected either before in August or now. And if some of these demand forces driving soybeans also come in and affect the corn market internationally, if the U.S. economy holds up, ethanol does decently, et cetera, then we start getting down to 2 billion bushels down to stocks to use figures closer to 10, 11%, and we're flirting with $3.94 corn.
All of that, by the way, is fully outlined in Dan's notes this week on the grain markets, including his corn and soybean price scenarios, which he just described. You can see more detail on that at agmanager.info. Good information as always, Dan. We'll talk again next Friday. Many thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien is a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, with us weekly here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today is back now. Well, in recent broadcasts, we've talked with our guest now about how to practically go about estimating corn and soybean yields in the field ahead of harvest. Well, we don't want to overlook one of our other main row crops in the state, that being grain sorghum, and what one needs to go through in coming up with an in-field estimate of that crop as well. So we brought by, once again, via phone, Ignacio Ciampitti, who is a crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. If a producer wants to have a relatively good idea of what those yields are out there potentially, there's a way of going about this. It's a formula similar to what we talked about with corn and soybeans, with one notable exception, Ignacio, the difference between the marketable commodities. Grain sorghum kernels are quite small, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, as always, thanks, Eric, for the invitation. So when many of our farmers start thinking about doing yield calculation or any yield forecast before harvesting, we emphasize this point of saying that in many situations, as any forecast, it always will have a certain degree of error and uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And as we are approaching the end of the season, that error really goes down. But I usually see this as a really good excuse to go out and make sure that we are scouting the fields, looking to see if there are any potential issues connected to insects, pressure in the crop, or disease, and really try to scout to make sure that even when conditions might be not perfect for finishing the crop, we want to make sure that we don't have an additional issue or problem just because we are not looking at those fields. And being on time, making sure that we take any decision as soon as we can get to know about it is extremely relevant. And then when we look at the calculations and these estimations, I mean, the main question that we usually have farmers asking us is when is the right moment that we can start making those yield estimates?
And what is that?
Well, I usually say it depends on the agronomists or farmers whenever they have time. But we try to emphasize that 2, 3, or 4 weeks after flowering is when we really will start getting a very good idea of what is the overall size of the heads, because usually the head size is defined, and it will be defined maximum size of the head at flowering. As in any situation, we will never ask any farmer to count the grain numbers, because as we usually try to do on corn, on other crops, I mean, because on sorghum we might have between 2,000 or 3,000 or even 4,000 grains in one head. So we try to move in the direction of, in order to make the estimates on-farm calculations, so we try to keep it really simple, but we try to do an exercise that the farmers will get a good feeling and a good level of prediction of what potential yield might be expecting at harvest. That we want to get a good idea of potentially what will be the final number of grains. One of the factors that still is unknown is the seed weight. As we mentioned before, in this crop specifically, the grain weight is not a relevant factor as we discussed for soybeans. On soybeans, any implication, any environmental condition affecting soybeans at the end of the season, they will be fluctuating yields in sometimes 20, 30, or 40% from the potential. And then in sorghum, we will not see, in many situations we might see probably just changes in between 10 or 20% of the final potential yield. We also need to remember this point of the variability within the fields. Mm-hmm. Let's say that we are working with a farmer, we have 60 acres, and those 60 acres, you have areas of the field that they look excellent, very good, and areas of the field that they look not good. So we need to get a very good idea when we are looking at trying to make an estimate at the field level of more or less what percentage of those good areas are part of the field or those bad areas are part of the field, and being realistic and trying to get samples and trying to get a fair number of samples so we can get a fair representative number of yield estimate based on those areas. So the variability is always something that we need to take into account, and we usually say, depending on the sections of the areas of the field, we need to get at least 5 to 10 sections in different areas of the field to get a good idea of how much variability I have. And of course, that yield estimation will fluctuate low from the low yielding areas and going to the high section in the high yielding areas. So those are the main implications before we get into the factors and how to estimate those factors.
And those factors, well, they ring familiar because some of them do reflect what we do for soybeans and corn, as you reported to us earlier. Coming up with the heads per unit area, the head count, if you will, very much likened to what we do for corn, isn't it?
It's exactly the same, in fact. If you're looking at the number of heads per unit area, if a farmer is on 30-inch row spacing, we just take a look to within the row, 17.4 foot length of the row. And if a sorghum is in 15 inches, then we count 2 rows. And if we are in 7.5 inches, then we measure 4 rows. But we always try to keep the same length, 17.4 foot, that usually will equal to 1/1000 of an acre. So the farmer has sorghum at 30-inch row spacing, and the farmer is counting basically that he has in that section 25 heads in 17.4 foot length. So we are saying that farmer probably has 25,000 heads per acre. That's one of the main factors on this process.
And that's the easy part, because what's next is coming up with an estimation of the number of seeds per head and aligned with that number of seeds per pound. And how does one easily get at that, Ignacio? Is there any way to get at that relatively simply?
Well, it's an excellent question, no, the answer. There are no really quick methods. We usually try to say that, and we show on the article that we prepare for the E-Update, as you might expect, when we're looking at very good yields, so we are usually looking at between more than 2,000 grains per head. When we're looking at poor yields, maybe when we are talking about maybe less than 100 bushels, we probably will be looking at heads that they will have at least less than 1,000 grains per head. And one of the things that we are coming, hopefully will be in the next coming months, is we have an application that farmers might be able then to take a picture, and then from that picture is kind of an app that will try to calculate and make an estimate on the grain number per head. Because the size of the heads are usually very well connected to the final grain number. The only thing that is still a limitation is that, as you know, sorghum has multiple different colors. We have some sorghums that the grains are kind of more on the purple side. We have some sorghums that, depending on the breeding and the materials, they are more kind of a white. The only thing that is basically the limitation of that application is that we will not be able to tell if you have 90% of the kernels are aborted. So that's something that we will ask the farmer just to introduce that coefficient, so then the calculation of the grain number is more realistic. But I think that this application will help farmers just to, based on the size of the heads, the sizes usually will give you a very good estimation of what will be the final grain number.
That'll be a tremendous asset for producers as they go about this, looking for that app to be released out of K-State very soon. By the way, if one would like to see a couple of tables that outline this very well as far as relating crop condition, expectations of yield to the average seed weight, and then the seeds per pound, you can find that in this Agronomy E-Update Newsletter article posted this past Friday. We'd referenced that. And from there, you come up with those values, Ignacio. One can throw the numbers together and come up with a relatively decent idea of the yield to be expected from a given field, right?
Yes, because the last factor is the seed weight, and usually the seed weight is something that, even if you look at our information, we try to divide that data in different yield levels, less than 50 bushels or more than 200 bushels. You will get to see that the average seed weight seems to be very stable. That usually we have numbers there that we talk about very close to 25 to 26 grams per 1,000 seeds. When you're looking at seeds per pound, we usually are in numbers that are very close to 18,000 seeds per pound. So the calculation at the end is just to think about the number of heads, the number of seeds per head, and then the number of seeds per pound, and then the number, basically the final is the pounds per bushel.
This will give you a good representative idea of what yield to anticipate from a given grain sorghum stand. And if you'd like more follow-up on this, once again, Ignacio's article in the E-Update newsletter recently does spell this out in further detail. Very helpful there. It's found at agronomy.ksu.edu. And once more, we'll look for that app to help with this process as well, coming out from your shop here at K-State very soon, Ignacio. Thanks for going over this with us. We'll catch up with you again quite soon.
Thanks, Eric, for the invitation, as always.
He's a crop production specialist with K-State Research and Extension and a frequent guest here on the broadcast, Ignacio Ciampitti. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned to Agriculture Today, broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson with you, and next up, today's agricultural news headlines. courtesy in part of DTN. The Trump administration is rolling out a reported $13 billion in new coronavirus aid payments to agricultural producers starting next week. The USDA's proposed rule for the second round of aid under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program was sent back to the department from the White House Office of Management and Budget. That set up the USDA to announce the new aid package. Sign up for the first round under CFAP ended last week, by the way. Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman Pat Roberts of Kansas immediately issued a release last evening praising this second round of CFAP, and Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue told reporters in Iowa earlier this month that this next round would cover as many as 89 crops and livestock, but that the CFAP-2 would not include funds for ethanol producers. Perdue said there was not enough money in the CCC to pay processors. Congress would need to authorize such payments, according to the Secretary. This new aid program for producers would come from $14 billion provided by Congress to replenish the CCC in the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act last spring. The USDA had been putting together a program to compensate producers for losses that happened after April the 15th. The first CFAP aid has paid out $9.9 billion to over 620,000 producers, cattle, dairy, corn, hog, and soybean producers, the main aid recipients. Again, producers will be able to apply for CFAP-2 beginning this coming Monday. Applications will be accepted through December the 11th. Meantime, farm state Republicans want more funding added to the CCC and say that USDA programs are at risk without it. Yesterday, Republican senators from Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Mississippi, and Arkansas all went to the Senate floor, each urging the Senate to replenish the CCC coffers. The senators said failure to add funds to the CCC would not only hurt already struggling farmers, ranchers, and growers, it would jeopardize the implementation of 2018 Farm Bill programs. Roberts said the farm programs are at risk without more CCC funds. Quoting him, "I would stress to my colleagues that now is not the time for political gamesmanship." And the National Pork Producers Council reiterated on a call yesterday the need for more aid in legislation. Hog producers still faced with $5 billion in losses, yet aid to pork producers under CFAP right now is about $593 million. The USDA rules on income and payment limits have limited aid, and the NPPC wants to see additional funds for producers that do not have the income or payment limit restrictions. The NPPC also wants a program that will compensate producers for euthanizing animals, which the USDA has maintained it does not have authority to do right now. Pork producers also want changes in the CCC charter to provide the USDA authority to provide aid in a pandemic. And for the upcoming year, farmers who sell directly to consumers should find it easier to participate in the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Right now, in order to participate in the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program, producers who grow many different products to sell at farmers markets and roadside stands have to keep separate yield and revenue records for every crop, no matter how small. That's one reason for relatively small participation in the program by direct marketers. But for the 2021 crop year, there will be some changes.
These changes, I think, will provide a way for them to participate in whole farm and provide better and obviously more affordable coverage.
Martin Barbary runs USDA's Risk Management Agency. He says starting in the 2021 crop year, growers won't have to report separate data for each commodity. They can just list their biggest crop seller as one and group the others together as one, so they can still get the premium discount for being a diversified operation.
Realistically, just going to alleviate a lot of the burdensome requirement to report detailed sales or yield records from any specific commodity.
Barbary says this should boost the ability of growers to participate in the whole farm program and may encourage more insurance agents to go out and try to sell the program to farmers. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Now here's Marcia Boswell with this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
The Kansas Wheat Commission annual recipe booklet has been a tradition that has gone on for the past 58 years, representing Kansas as the wheat state and breadbasket of America. With the cancellation of the state fair this year, we want to ensure that you are able to obtain a book. There are a couple options for you to receive it this year. If you would like the physical copy, you may request it at nationalfestivalofbreads.com. There will be a direct link on the homepage for you to easily access. If you'd like to view the book online, you may visit nationalfestivalofbreads.com/2020recipes. This will bring you to the page showing all of the 18 recipes, as well as a link to download the book itself. Your local extension office may also have a supply that you can pick up. While many people are excited to get their book, we love to hear some of the reasons behind their excitement. For some, it's adding to a collection that they've had for many years, and others, it's using the recipes from the book to get a purple ribbon at the county fair baking contest. We hope everyone who gets their hands on a copy enjoys the recipes as much as the two ladies behind the book enjoyed creating and testing them. Cindy Falk, Kansas Wheat Nutrition Educator, and Julene DeRushi, Kansas Wheat Nutrition Educator Assistant, spend endless hours testing recipes, some several times each, to make sure they will be successful. Falk says we take pride in knowing our recipes are well tested. One of their favorite parts is pulling vintage recipes that are meaningful and testing them to change a few ingredients to make them flavorful, more nutritious, and easier to prepare. That was one of the main goals this year as they found their inspiration from recipe archives. The success of this book has been the dedication of past and present home economists, nutritionists, and part-time assistants working in the Kansas Wheat Commission Test Kitchen. For the last several years, Falk and DeRushi have been creating the book, with this being Falk's 33rd and DeRushi's 6th consecutive year. Not only did they master the recipes, but they also did the baking, food styling, and photography that you see in this year's book and several of the past recipe books. DeRushi says from appetizers to desserts, we want these recipes to become family favorites. That's what motivates them to make the book perfect each year. While some of the recipes come from an old family favorite or a recipe book blast from the past, every other year features winning recipes from the National Festival of Breads. This is where finalists' talents are showcased and shared with others. We invite you to request the free 2020 recipe book and enjoy the variety of recipes made from flour and ingredients produced by Kansas wheat farmers. To get your book, visit nationalfestivalofbreads.com. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia, and this is Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly get-together with K-State climatologist Mary Knapp, as she'll talk Kansas agricultural weather with us. And it's very clear now, Mary, we're in a prolonged dry stretch, but the latest drought monitor hasn't quite fully captured that, you say.
Right, because the latest drought monitor is for the last week's data ending on Tuesday of this week. And last week, although it may be a dim memory, was actually very wet. And the moisture came in a favorable pattern. It was a multi-day event. We didn't get everything dumped on one day. So it was very beneficial for the soil moisture profile. Unfortunately, it was too late to do anything much for the corn, not really very favorable for the beans or sorghum, and it's going to be a distant memory by the time fall crops get dusted in. So we'll take it. You definitely want to keep that soil profile full, but it's not going to be enough for our fall season.
And in fact, we may be looking back fondly at last week's weather as we move forward into the fall. The intensity of the drought in Kansas, what's it look like according to the latest?
According to the latest, we had a substantial reduction of drought, mostly in the eastern part of the state where we had moderate drought, and that has moved to abnormally dry conditions. The 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day both suggest that it's going to be drier than normal. The quantitative precip forecast optimistically has 1/10 of an inch in a couple of places in central Kansas, and that's it. in Manhattan, we still would expect about 1/10 of an inch a day. So that's going to be very underrepresenting what we should be seeing for our fall season. They've just released the October outlook and the October, November, December outlook, and both of those suggest warmer than normal conditions and drier than normal conditions. Warmer than normal doesn't necessarily mean a return to 90 or 100-degree days. The mid-80s that we're seeing now would actually be warmer than normal as we move into October.
And all of that, Mary, is very much in keeping with what was officially declared here just several days back, La Nina. This is precisely what you would anticipate from a La Nina in this part of the country, right?
Right. In our area, that is very characteristic of a La Nina pattern. With a typical La Nina, what you generally see is drier and warmer conditions along the southern U.S. and wetter and cooler conditions along the northern fringes of the country. And, of course, Kansas is falling right in between those two regions, with a good chance that the dryness will persist and be most notable in the southern third of the state.
Now, there is a downside to this, obviously, and an upside. It will allow progress on harvest, as now we have corn picking going on, soybeans soon to ramp up, grain sorghum. We can get there with some open weather pretty quickly.
Right. And that, as you said, the open weather will be very favorable for getting those crops in the bin after a very trying growing season. And it's a contrast for the last two seasons where we've been very wet in our fall harvest period. So, again, it'll be welcome from that standpoint. And as we move into the winter months, having a more open winter with less stress on the livestock would also be beneficial. The question is, again, just how dry do we get? We are moving into our drier season, so being drier than normal won't have nearly the consequences as the dry summer would have. The big question is, can we squeeze out another couple of weeks like we saw last week within that October-November time frame so that we can get those fall-planted crops up and established.
And any chance, Mary, because these are rolling in with some regularity now, these tropical storms and some evolving into hurricanes that are hitting the Gulf region, the East Coast, but particularly the Gulf. Could Kansas benefit from any of that moisture at any point?
If they move further west into the Gulf of Mexico, there is a chance that we could benefit from that. There's one tropical system that is getting ready to develop along the Bay of Campeche in Mexico. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going to track mainly westward rather than having a northern curve to it, which would keep that moisture out of our region. We'll also be watching the Pacific hurricane region off the west coast of Mexico. That, in times, has brought favorable moisture into the desert southwest and into Kansas. But at this point, there's not much promising in that. And the Atlantic systems that they're monitoring have the outlook that they're going to curve northward before they make it as far as the central Gulf of Mexico.
It's not specifically a weather phenomenon, but it's climatological, that's for sure, Mary. And that is, we are seeing the smoke residue from those wildfires in the west canvass a lot of the western half of the U.S. now. In fact, that has drifted into our state. Any implications from that?
Well, there has been chatter along the climate groups about that. Most of the smoke has been to our north until the end of this week when it started to drift a little bit further south. One of the things that they've looked at as a comparison, that has reduced the amount of incoming sunlight in the area, and there have been comparisons that it's reduced it so that the light that we're seeing now is equivalent to a mid-October mix of sun rather than the current, about a 20% reduction in the incoming solar radiation. which has implications particularly in any of the photosensitive crops. And that will probably be most notable in an early change in the fall foliage, but you could also see earlier leaf drop in soybeans or something of that nature. So again, indirect, but there is a definite possibility that that's going to represent an early arrival of the fall conditions.
It's just another oddity of this year 2020.
Right.
Thank you for coming over as always.
Thanks.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. And that is our time for today, as well as this week. Thanks to you likewise for being along with us, and enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.